For me, organizing this wedding has been both exciting and stressful. Mark, my fiancé, and I have been together for quite some time. Mixing our families has been a trip in and of itself. From past partnerships, Mark has 4 children. His youngest, a 5-year-old son, twin daughters aged 7, another daughter aged 11. My young daughter Mia is 5 years old and just entered kindergarten. Yes, we have a lot of children in the mix. Until lately, things were going very nicely. Mark has always stressed treating everyone equally, which was a major component in why I felt good about us mixing our families. About what a good, loving family should look like, I believed we agreed. But things have started to seem weird now that we are organizing the wedding. We have been managing the typical wedding elements: locations, cuisine, color schemes, the entire 9 yards. At first, I thought it was sweet, but then it struck me. He hadn't mentioned Mia at all. We eventually started talking about roles for the children, and Mark was delighted to have his 3 daughters as flower girls and his son as the ring bearer. I told myself maybe it was a mistake. Mark does have more children, and he has been rather committed to ensuring everyone has a part. But Mia is my daughter, and I also wanted her to be part of our wedding. I asked in passing, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if Mia could also be a flower girl?" At first, I thought I hadn't heard him right, so I asked again, just to be sure. I expected he would be open to it, or at least willing to discuss it, but he promptly shut it down saying, "3 is enough." But he kept repeating himself, "3's enough." I found this shocking. He doesn't even want to think about including my daughter in the ceremony. Here is a day meant for our new life together. Saying that Mia attending the wedding wouldn't disturb anything and that it was quite vital to me, I tried to reason with him. I tried to keep cool, not wanting to blow up over this when we still had so much preparation remaining. But he merely shrugged and gave me a flat, "It wouldn't work." It ached, though. Mia is at that age when she is fixated with princesses and clothes dressing. I knew that being a flower girl would be absolutely meaningful to her. Not only is it for her, but it also relates to me. When I told Mark this, he simply sat there with a blank expression, as if he wasn't really listening. I wanted her to feel like she belonged in this family, especially on a day dedicated to merging our lives together. He answered at last with an angry groan. "You're making this a big deal over nothing," he replied, nearly contemptuously. I developed a twinge of annoyance. He seemed to be utterly missing the point. This went beyond just floral decorations or attire. For now, I chose to back off, believing maybe he was simply stressed with all the wedding plans and would come around. Mia felt included in this new family we are building. Still, the entire thing tasted bad in my mouth. I tried convincing myself that was only a little component of the larger day, and maybe it didn't matter as much as I was projecting. A few days later, Mia heard the twins discussing being flower girls and got excited. In the back of my mind, though, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that he was being unusually stiff about something that ought to have been a no-brainer. Grinning broadly, she hurried up to meet me and exclaimed, "Mom, I want to be a flower girl too." Her innocent and hopeful expression caused my heart to swell, and maybe break a little. Knowing how the last chat with Mark had gone, I knew it would be difficult to let this go. That evening, I brought it up with him once more, telling him Mia had overheard the twins and was now really thrilled about being a flower girl. I hoped he would understand both to me and to her the significance involved. Still, he sighed once more and said, "Look, 3 flower girls are plenty. We don't need more." I couldn't grasp it. He hardly gave it any thought. One more time, I attempted to convey that inviting Mia would mean the world to her, a little gesture. I was not asking him to move everything or knock any of his children forward. Just wanted Mia to feel unique on a day meant to bring our families together. He rejected it once more, though, and I could feel my tolerance faltering. At this point, I was beginning to feel actually offended. I wasn't attempting to complicate things. It seemed as though he was unnecessarily separating his kids from my kid. I didn't want that. On this day meant to be about us all together, I simply wanted to feel like Mia mattered as much as his kids did. He seemed to be treating her differently the more he pushed back, so that stung. I chose to let it go, hoping perhaps he would come around on his own. But the sensation persisted, chewing at me each time I saw those flower girl gowns or considered the wedding. Though I wanted to be thrilled about our wedding, I couldn't get rid of the sense that his rejection to have Mia included was a warning flag. A few days following my discussion with Mark about the flower girls, I decided to temporarily put it off. Maybe he simply needed time to come around, I told myself. But fate had other ideas. Mia began to ask questions after hearing the twins talk about serving as flower girls. She flared up immediately away, flashing from ear to ear with great enthusiasm. The happiness on her face pulled at my heart, and truthfully, it stung too. She turned to me with her big naive smile and said, "Mom, I want to be a flower girl too." For a moment, I considered attempting to divert her or brush it off, but I knew Mia well enough to know this wasn't something she would forget. I knew how that last conversation with Mark had gone and didn't want her to get her hopes raised if he wasn't going to budge. I sat down with Mark once more that evening, attempting to approach it as gently as I could. Mia had heard the twins chatting, and she was now really thrilled about being a flower girl too. I even mentioned I expected sharing Mia's delight might melt his heart a little, maybe even help him grasp the relevance of it all. She thought it would be quite meaningful for her to have that role and feel included. He said, "3 flower girls are enough. We don't need more," with a finality that made me feel as though my words were bouncing off a wall. He sighed, like I was suggesting a chore. I tried once more, stressing for her as much as for myself the significance. He merely glanced at me, though, and said, "You're making this way too serious." I felt the irritation building. I was being pushy. I understand. We all have different ideas, and wedding preparation can be really trying. But why was he so hostile to this little request? Once more, I told him, adding Mia wouldn't take anything away from his children. Together, they might all be flower girls. His reaction was, he said, snapping, "It's not a major concern." Hearing that, I felt a stinging of bitterness as "you are making things too serious." He was acting as though I was overreacting, as if I were crazy. I did not, however, back off. I explained to him that Mia felt like she belonged in the family, not only about having a nice moment. I couldn't believe he would say, though, as his expression kept locked, and then he hit me with something I wasn't expecting. "I thought we were past this, my kid, your kid stuff." Instead of creating some separation, I was trying to incorporate her. This was about her feeling like she belonged, not about me making it my kid against your kid. I sat there startled for a moment, my heart aching and my ideas confused. I took a long breath, trying to be calm, and told him, "She just wants to be a part of this, Mark." She was twisting things around, making it appear like I was the one causing disturbance. "She's not asking for the world," but he cut me off once more, saying I was acting dramatically and I had to let it go. That dramatic word cut right away. I reassured him, "Fine, I won't push it." But inwardly I felt shattered. I couldn't believe he was reacting like way over something that felt so little but yet so important. Thinking that my kid and I were less valuable than I had thought hurt. Mia asked me later that evening whether she would be a flower girl, and I had to try to keep my voice steady as I informed her we were still developing the specifics. She nodded, a little let down, but she said very little more. Seeing her like that tore my heart. Every time the twins mentioned becoming flower girls, I could see Mia's face drop a little. She is a young child who needs to feel unique, and I felt like I was failing her by not making that happen over the next several days. She never grumbled, but I could see she felt excluded, and it just ate at me. I continued going over my chat with Mark, wondering whether I would have phrased things better to get him on my side, or whether I missed something. As I considered it more, I couldn't resist the persistent sense that there was something deeper going on. Honestly, it felt like he had already made up his decision, like he had drawn this line where Mia was simply here. Mark seemed to be separating his kids from my daughter, and I wasn't sure how to challenge that view. We are supposed to be creating a real family, a life together. Mia should feel as like she belongs here, as if she is not only following in the footsteps of another family. Still, I tried to tell myself it was just one curve in the road, that maybe he was simply overwhelmed with all the preparing. Mark's hesitation to include her in something as important as the wedding had me wondering what our future together may really reflect. I kept hoping he would see things my way finally. But it didn't stop the knot in my gut from getting stronger every time Mia looked at me with those large, hopeful eyes. Finally, a few more days went, and I felt I could not keep silent about this anymore. The guilt continued chewing at me, even though I had been biting my tongue attempting to persuade myself to let it go. My daughter shouldn't have to be explained to why she isn't permitted to attend her own mother's wedding. I so brought it up with Mark once more one evening after the children were asleep. I said, "Look, I know you're set on the 3 girls, but I really think we should find a way to include Mia too." He didn't not even let me finish before letting out this huge sigh, rolling his eyes and saying, "Are we seriously still talking about this?" That response simply set a fuse in me. The eye roll, the tone, like I was being a pest for considering the sentiments of my daughter. That reply struck me like a slap. I kept my voice steady as I informed him, "Yes, we're still talking about this because it matters to me and it matters to her." He dismissed it once more, telling me I was overanalyzing and that the kids wouldn't even remember who was or wasn't a flower girl. He behaved as if I were asking for the moon while I was standing there outlining why this mattered. I said to him, "It's a major deal to her and to me." I couldn't believe it. He dropped the remark that turned everything around. "Maybe it's a big deal to you, but I think you're making this a my kid against your kid thing, and I don't appreciate that." Fighting to include my daughter, I was here and he was accusing me of dividing things. He flipped it around as if I were the one separating her from the family, although I was literally attempting to bring her into it. It had the sensation of a gut punch. Telling him that I wanted her to feel like she belonged, that she was a member of this family, I tried to explain one last time. Coldly staring at me, he replied, "You're being toxic. You know that? This mindset is what's driving issues." I thought I was in some strange dream. He called me toxic when I was standing there trying to explain why it mattered to me that Mia was included. I finally responded, "I don't understand why you're acting like this is some major request." He crossed his arms and looked at me as though I were draining him or the one spoiling everything. "She only wants to be involved. Why cannot you understand that?" Laughing dismissively, almost mocking, he continued, "It's silly that you're so hung up on something as little as this. Like I treat everyone equally. You are the one causing a stir." In that instant, I felt as like I was seeing Mark for the genuine him. "If my daughter misses out on participation, it is not treating everyone equally," I informed him. "This is our wedding. Should she not feel as though she belongs too?" He waved me off, telling me I was blowing things out of proportion and that I was choosing this hill to die on. It was as though he had checked out of the conversation, like he was done with trying to comprehend. If this is how you approach something so small, what's it going to be like when there's a bigger issue? I asked him, "If you won't even give something that important thought, how can I believe you to have my back?" He laughed and tightened his cross arms. "Oh, don't create some great grandeur about trust here. This is about you not honoring my choices." I felt as though I was lost in fog. This was supposed to be our family, our wedding, and he was behaving as if it were all his will. I told him my kid ought to be part of something this significant. He merely shook his head, adding, "You're being petty." That word, petty, cut me more deeply than I anticipated. It felt like that word, petty, stung more than I would have cared to confess. It felt like a smack, like he was discounting all I was saying and every sensation I experienced. Speechless, I just watched him go as if he were done with the conversation and with me. After he left, I stood in the empty room trying to sort everything that had transpired. I felt so alone in that moment, battling for something that felt so basic, just for my daughter to be a part of this day that was supposed to bring us all together. This was about how he saw me, how he saw my kid, and perhaps even how he saw our future, not only about a flower girl slot. The next few days were difficult, and for the first time I began to question whether perhaps this was not what I had signed up for. Trying to figure out where everything went wrong, I ran through every conversation in my brain. What Mark said, how he laughed at me for worrying about Mia's place in our family, and that "your kid versus my kid's" line he'd tossed at me had me thinking Mia was only trailing along, as he was clearly stating, that his children came first. The more I considered it, the more things seemed to stick out. He seemed to be treating her as an extra rather than as part of the family. Little events, things I could have passed over earlier. Like when we would all be with the children, he would always go out of his way to make his kids feel unique, playing with them, teasing them, giving them his whole concentration. And to be clear, I adored that he raised them with such a wonderful father. Looking now, though, I saw he paid Mia less of the same type of attention. He would leap right in when his children requested him for assistance with something, even if it was merely stroking the hair of their doll. It wasn't that he was cruel to her, but he was distant. When Mia asked for something similar, he would barely glance her way and say a brief, "Yes, yeah," then resume whatever he was doing. And Mia was beginning to see as well. She had not said anything straightforward, but I could tell. She would seem depressed when he scarcely laughed at her jokes or ignored her. She is just 5. However, children can tell when they are excluded, and as her mother, that devastated me. I decided to gently bring it up one more time, hoping he would at last see where I was coming from. I continued trying to tell myself that he was just stressed or distracted, but the second I started, he cut me off, obviously agitated. Rolling his eyes, he cautioned, "You're reading too much into this." "Can we kindly proceed?" stated there. Shocked was my state. This was about my daughter feeling included, not about the flower girl job anymore. And he was behaving as though I were creating imaginary problems. I began to really question if this was the man I wanted to live with for the rest of my life. I wanted this wedding to be the beginning of something lovely for all of us. A new chapter where we could join together as one family. A fresh chapter where someone laughed at me when I stood up for my daughter and would not even contemplate compromising. Rather, though, it was beginning to feel like a warning sign I was unable to ignore. I never would have imagined I would be questioning my relationship days before my wedding. But here I was, replaying every little moment, trying to figure out if I had missed anything, if I had been blind to a side of him I didn't want to see. As I kept thinking it over, I started wondering what our future would look like. Regarding family gatherings, holidays, and birthdays, what? Always would it be his kids and my kid? Mia would be on the sidelines, constantly feeling second to his children just because she lacked his last name. So I did not want a life where she would be. She needs to be loved and appreciated. Right now, I wasn't sure Mark could provide that. After a few more tense days without any meaningful resolution, I knew I couldn't keep acting as though everything was under control. Though I felt I had to say something, I wasn't sure how to bring it up without igniting conflict. But the guilt gnawed at me every time I observed Mia's countenance drop slightly upon the twins mentioning the wedding. One morning, while we were both seated at the kitchen table, I took a long breath and at last told her the truth. I couldn't explain to her why she wasn't let to be part of her own mother's wedding. I added, trying to keep my voice calm, "Mark, I've been having second thoughts about the wedding." He looked at me startled and asked, "About what?" Like he honestly did not know. I therefore told him. I asked him if this was the correct decision, since his disregard of my emotions regarding Mia caused me doubt. That it was much more than just her being a flower girl, that it was about how he perceived our family. He sat there, mouth tight, and at last whispered, "I can't believe you're letting this ruin everything." Right now, it felt like he wasn't ready to meet me halfway. Now that we are so near to the wedding, you are questioning everything over one small detail. That sentence, one small thing, just started me off. To Mia or myself, it was not one little thing. It was about helping her to feel like a member of the family and about proving her belonging here. He only shook his head, though, staring at me as though I was overlooking the point. Leaning back, he continued, "Look, I already made decisions for this wedding. I'm not saying I don't care about your daughter." And there it was, the last nail in the coffin. I do not feel like I should have to adjust everything just because she wants to be a flower girl. It related to him and his choices, not about Mia. For her or for me, he was not ready to even slightly bend. Right then, I understood this was always how it would be. Every time something significant happened to my kid or myself, if it didn't match his perspective, he would simply close it. I inhaled deeply and felt an unusual peace come over me. I wanted to stop arguing. I wanted to stop struggling for something that ought to have come naturally. Looking him in the eye, I replied, "Mark, how are we going to manage the major problems if we cannot agree on something as basic as including my daughter? Given this is always how it will be, how can I marry you?" Though he seemed to be at a loss for words, he stared at me in a way that did not indicate he understood. More like I was squandering his time, that he was bored with me. Hearing him say that once more, my heart cracked a little, but I knew I was doing the right thing. At last, he mumbled, "I can't believe you're throwing this all away over one little thing." What use it was if he couldn't see why this mattered. Rising with shaky hands, I said to him, "I'm not throwing anything away. The hardest part was packing my stuff and informing Mia that we wouldn't be staying here anymore. I was selecting what would be best for my daughter and me. Then I left, and for the first time I felt like I was seeing things clearly. Though she didn't completely comprehend, she said, 'Is Mark still going to be my dad?' And that question tore me apart within. Abandoning a relationship is always difficult, but abandoning the dreams I'd constructed around it felt even more difficult. I reassured her, 'No, sweetie, but we're going to be okay. She's young, and I know she'll adjust.' I had hoped a real partnership, a fresh start, a contented family. But I came to know that I couldn't live with someone who didn't give my daughter or me top attention. She is due better than that. I deserve better than that. Hence, here I am, understanding maybe this wasn't meant to be, and days away from what was going to be my wedding. Although it hurts, I know I chose the best path for my daughter and me. I phoned off the wedding almost 1 week ago. Trying to concentrate on Mia and put everything with Mark behind me, I've been doing my best to relax into some sort of normal. I'll tell you straightforward, it's not easy. I find myself wondering about the life we were creating together and what may have been. Still, I tell myself every time I made the correct decision. First and foremost will always be Mia's happiness and her place in our family. Then, just as I was beginning to find some calm, he turned up at my house. Mark was standing there, looking all serious as though he had something significant to say as I opened the door. My heart began to race. Part of me wanted to bang the door, but another, maybe the part still caring, wanted to hear him out. Telling myself to give him a chance, I allowed him in. We sat down and he began with a long sigh, as though he were bearing the weight of the earth. He told me he missed us and lamented how things turned out. "I've been thinking a lot," he continued, "and maybe I was a little too harsh." I had a flash of hope for a minute. Perhaps he was at last seeing things from my point of view and realizing why this mattered to Mia and me. But as he continued to talk, that hope began to wither. His apologies came with restrictions, as though he were outlining guidelines I would have to follow should we get back together. He stated things like, "I simply want you to stop bringing up these problems with Mia." Hearing him say that felt like a gut check. It's draining to feel as though everything revolves around her. "Mark, she is my daughter," I informed him. 5 years old is her age. She will naturally be my first concern. He nodded, sighing tiredly like I was doing. "I understand," he responded, "but you have to meet me halfway here. You have to quit obsessing on every tiny detail about her feeling permeating everything. It simply complicates things." I was shocked. He was sorry, but only if I promised to stop advocating for my daughter to feel a member of our family. He urged me to let things pass, to overlook the times she felt excluded or second to his children. I gave one more try to reach him. "Mark, it went beyond the wedding or the floral girl issue. It's about giving Mia a sense of familial membership." He glanced at me, practically annoyed, and said, "This is exactly what I mean. You and your kids on one side and me and Mia on the other. Like it needs to be all or nothing. You are overly preoccupied with making everything ideal for her. It doesn't have to be so severe." I found what I was listening to unbelievable. She thus simply naturally puts your children second? Mark moved in his seat, obviously agitated, and continued, "It's not about her being excluded." I inquired, trying not to let the hurt show in my voice. "It's about you not having to regulate everything. Just let her be part of things when it works. Stop trying to force it at that point." I felt a great weight drop in my chest. Not in a way that counted. He would never regard her as part of his family. He couldn't even think about what it would mean for Mia to feel like she belonged. He was so preoccupied with ensuring his children were comfortable. Then he remarked, "I love you, but you have to let go of some of this control if we are to make this work." It struck me like a ton of bricks. I cannot have you challenging me every time I decide about my children. He was saying, straight out, that he wanted things to go back to how they were, but only if I agreed to let him manage everything his way and to overlook her needs when they collided with his children. Breathing deeply, I stared him squarely in the eye and felt my heart equalize as I spoke. He glanced at me, quite startled, like he hadn't expected me to actually walk away. "Mark, if that's what you think a family is, then I don't think I can be part of it." "What are you saying?" His voice softening, almost as if he was terrified of my response, he asked, "I'm saying I'm done. If this is the way things are going, I cannot wed you." He tried to argue, saying I was throwing everything away over one issue, but I just shook my head since I could stay with someone who did not see my kid as part of his family. "Mark, there is not one problem here." He kept trying to persuade me, saying I was overreacting and that he hadn't meant it that way. "You see her as an extra, as someone you're dealing with instead of someone you want to include." But I was done paying attention. I had spent so much time wishing he would come around and see what it meant to really mix families. "I think it's best if we don't see each other anymore," I said as I got up and opened the door. "I have to concentrate on what's best for my daughter." He remained there momentarily, appearing as though he wanted to say something, but he refrained. He only shook his head, turned, and left the door open. As I closed it after him, I experienced an odd mix of grief and relief. Though part of me still, I loved him. Yet I knew I couldn't be with someone who did not love my daughter the way she deserved. If I have to establish it on my own, then so be it. She deserves a family that makes her feel included and valuable. As I locked the door, I experienced calm. Moving ahead was not going to be simple, but at least I knew I had chosen Mia and myself the correct path. Walking away from that relationship was not only about standing up for my kid, it was also about standing up for the life I wanted for both of us. She deserves a home where she doesn't feel like an outsider. And although difficult, I know that leaving was the finest choice I could have made.